This week we're going to be looking at 19th century longsword, or two-handed sword. In the 19th century, they tend to refer to it as two-handed sword rather than longsword. But, you know, we're just going to call it longsword because that's what most people will be familiar with. So something that kind of popped up as I was promoting this is a lot of people didn't believe me or were quite surprised to learn that there was longsword in the 19th century and were curious as to why. Short answer is there was HEMA in the 19th century, or historical fencing, the first people to sort of look at medieval and Renaissance manuals and try and work out what they were all about, all popped up in the 19th century. And one of them, Alfred Hutton, actually wrote a manual of fencing with historical weapons, specifically with the hope of getting people in regular fencing schools to engage with, well, what is essentially HEMA back then. And so, yeah, that's what we'll be doing tonight. So this is based off Alfred Hutton's manual, Old Swordplay, which is in turn based off mostly actually Renaissance era longswords, so things like Moroso and whatnot. So yeah, just heads up, there are a bunch of spam bots who have been spamming this page. So I'm just going to be banning sporadic comments from time to time, but don't let that deter you. If you do have a question, ask them in the comments and I will get to them as quickly as I can. Likewise, if you just want to ask any questions or say anything or anything else, just chuck in the comments. I'll get to it as quickly as I can. But otherwise, let's launch into it, or at least we will after I ban this next spam bot. They are unrelenting. I've spent the last hour basically, basically trying to get rid of all of this numerous and multiple spam bots. Anyway, let's get the show rolling. Oh, the other thing before we get started is after the lesson, we're going to meet up on Zoom. So I'll post the Zoom link, which will be 100% not spam, to the Facebook event and in the comments to YouTube video. But it should already be in the video description and in the event description. So fairly easy to find. All right, so start with, grab yourself your trusty longsword. In this case, I'm choosing a plastic sword. And we're going to start with the guard. So Hutton suggests there are 3 guards for his longsword system. And incidentally, if you're familiar with Bolognese swordsmanship, and particularly Bolognese two-handed sword, if you can tell me the names of these guards in Bolognese in the comments, I'd really appreciate that because, yeah, like I said, this method is very, very simple, very, very simplistic so that people can adopt it in their fencing school. Anyway, the guard, we're going to start with a stance. So to start off with, what I want you to do is start with your feet in the nail. We're going to start with a typical 19th century stance with your right foot in front of your left foot. So it should look like this. What I want you to do is step so that your feet are about 2 foot widths apart, and then bend your knees so that you've got a nice comfortable bend. And a good way to test how good your bend is to step back and forth. And if your head is relatively level, like you can see with the line of blinds behind me, my head isn't really bobbing up and down that much, you've got a good amount of bend. Whereas if you're standing too high, your head's going to bob up and down either because you're squatting to step and then coming back up, or because you're stepping like a pendulum. So from here, we're going to take the sword and we're going to hold it with our hands at, probably with our top hand, in this case our right hand, at about shoulder height. The blade with the flat facing forward. So you should that from the side. And it should be held vertically or even slightly back, or maybe slightly forward. There's some variation. But this is what Hutton calls the engaging guard. This is his sort of central guard for his longsword system. He then and he says this is derived primarily from Moroso. He then says there are 2 other guards that are pretty good. One is the guard of cart or court, where you bring your hands down to, well, basically the height they'd be for a 19th century court guard. So if you imagine your elbow was bent, and your forearm is hanging out straight, that's the height your hand should be. Although when you're doing this in batting, it's going to vary depending on what your opponent is doing. But extend it out straight, and your right hand or your top hand should be in line with the opposite side of your body. So I've basically covered myself on, in my case, my left side. If you're fencing left-handed, it'd be right side, but I've covered myself on that side. The other guard Hutton says you can have is a tierce guard. So my hand goes to essentially the hand position, the way the position would be for tierce if I was using a single-handed sword, except extended, and there's another hand on the weapon. Extend out like that. So my hand is in this plane. 45. The tip is held fairly forward. You want it above your head or above your head height so that you're covered. There's no, in Hutton's longsword, there is no thrusting, it's all cuts. But there are things that we would extrapolate, that we know Hutton extrapolated to longsword that do include thrust. So you can include them if you're wanting to be both a Hutton purist and a thrusting longswordist. That is historically reasonable. So these are our core guards. So what we're going to do from here is we're going to learn to move between them. So once you start in the engaging guard with your right foot forward, if I call switch, what I want you to do is bring your feet together and then switch to the opposite side. So actually, traditionally you do this by bringing your foot back and forward. I don't like doing that because there's a catch behind me. So switch, feet together, and then change. But otherwise, I'm going to call out the name of different guards, and I want you to move to that guard position. So starting the engaging guard, let's go to cart. And if I call out cart, I want you to have the same, when I call out cart, I want you to move so it's comfortable, so that your feet are in position. So tierce, cart. All right, it's from here. Engaging guard, tierce, cart, tierce, engaging guard, switch, switch, tierce, cart, tierce, engaging guard, switch, tierce, engaging guard, cart. Right, cool. So hopefully that's helped sort of cement what the three basic guards are. Now let's look at the attacks. Well, I've got a question, so I might quickly. Someone saying hello, which is very nice. All right, so let's look at the basic attacks. So much like saber, cane, staff, the way Hutton builds his attacks is through starting with a moulinet and then expanding them with footwork and more arm action. The idea is the moulinets in 19th century British fencing is rarely used as a combative action. It's a warm-up, and particularly in Hutton's system. Hutton never uses moulinets in bouting or in sword fighting, but he does recommend them as a way of limbering up the wrist. So, starting in your engaging guard, what we're going to do is we're going to first start with the moulinet. So first I want you to move to this position with your sword 45 pointing out to the same side as your top hand, and cut down. Now bring your sword all the way around, 45 pointing out to the opposite side and down. Now turn your hands over, come back up along the same line. Now turn your hands over and come back up the same line. Turn your hands flat, come across, turn your hands flat, come across, and back to guard. There's only 6 cuts in this system, not 7. For those of you who are used to my saber, where there's a 7th cut and maybe even the forbidden 8th cut, there's not so many cuts in this. It's designed to be kept simple. So let's start doing that as a consistent motion. So move to position for cut number 1, And when I talk about cut positions, what I mean is you move to the position before where your tip is about to descend. So this is the cut number 1 position. This would be the cut number 3 position. So we're going to come up. Moving between those positions is quite useful. But let's go to position for cut 1 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and back to guard. So let's just do this like comfortably and nicely. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, back to guard. Once more for luck. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and back to guard. I feel a bit kind of Highlandery doing this, like the film. I kind of want to do this on like a cliffside with a lightning storm behind me. I just think it'd be cool. It's only very cold, or even very cold if there's a storm behind me, but All right. So now what I want you to do is switch your feet. And we're going to try doing the same motion, but on the other side. So extend position for cut number 1, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and back to guard. Position for number 1, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and back to guard. All right. So now that you've done that a little bit, let's try and make it a bit more complicated. Now we're going to switch feet so that we're always cutting away from our leg. So what I mean by that is when I do 1, I cut, so I'm cutting away from my leg. My leg is here, my cut is going over there. I go 2, cutting away from my leg. 3, 4, 5, 6, and back to guard. All right, so everyone ready? Let's do this with switching legs. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and back to guard. And once more for luck. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and back to guard. And yeah, let's do it once more. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and back to guard. All right. So when Hutton does these, obviously you don't just sort of stand still and cut in the air. You actually cut on footwork. And the predominant footwork for this is passing. So I'm just going to quickly check for questions. Just everyone saying hello to each other, which is very nice. All right, is a passing step. In the actual orthodox longsword stuff, there's no lunging, but there are descriptions and depictions of people lunging using a longsword in the period. I think it's also very, very important for anyone who's done like Renaissance era sword fighting to remember that what Hutton puts in his manual and what he knew and was doing are not the same thing. Hutton references and obviously knows about techniques that he doesn't describe when he's writing down what the manuals are. And if you look at Hutton's body of work, it's pretty apparent that Old Sword Play, the manual he wrote, was not, it's not like a modern, here's like Maya but interpreted kind of manual. It's very much here's a very, very simplistic method for using this weapon that you can adopt in your fencing club as a way of sort of spreading, the interest in historical fencing. Right, so let's look at attacking. So the predominant footwork when you attack is a passing step. So if you remember our switching exercise, we're now going to do those as attacks. So what I want to do is from my guard position, I want to move to a cut position, and then when my foot lands, I want to reach full extension and cut through. So to show you that from the side, guard, cut position and land, and nearly cut my wall and cut through. And then generally when you retreat with a parry. But Hutton sort of envisaged this system as very much you end on extension and then come back. It's not like nearly every other 19th century weapon where the attack doesn't end until you fully return to guard. It's a bit weird like that. So this is going to be a bit interesting given the small space we all have. Well, I have. Maybe not, maybe some of you are lucky to have a very, very big lounge room. But starting in our cut position, the way we cut is we move to the cut position, we start stepping forward, and we want our foot and our tip to land at the same time and cut through, because we're cutting through a target. Return to guard. The same deal with the longsword. All of the cuts are against the leg. So if my right leg is coming forward, I'm cutting from right to left. If my left leg is coming forward, I'm cutting from left to right. All right. So let's practice. Let's practice each cut going forward. We'll practice cuts going forward and back. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut one forward, come to guard, cut two going back, and back to guard to practice the cutting forward and going back. And you can redouble on this on a reverse movement. That seems to be perfectly fine. So from the engaging guard, cut one coming forward, cut two coming back, and return to the engaging guard. Cut one coming forward, cut two coming back, and return to the engaging guard. One forward, two back, and return to the engaging guard. And now switch, and we're going to do the opposite. So we're going to go cut two forward, cut one back, and return to the engaging guard. Two forward, one back. Two forward, one back. And once more for luck, two forward, one back. Right. And you can extrapolate this movement pattern to pretty much all of the other cuts. So I'm not going to run through I'm not going to run through each of them tonight, just because we'd be here all night. But something to do with, something to do with your own work is go, okay, I can cut forward and cut back with any two combination of cuts, or you can even do them randomly. In fact, let's do them randomly now. We have a quick question relating to cuts. So Bill wants to know, is it normal longsword to keep the elbows locked out, especially with the weight of the sword being what it is? So when I cut, I'm not actually locking my elbow. So this is probably not quite as obvious with me, but my elbow lock is there. I'm coming to just before lock. So basically when you lock your joints, your muscles will relax. You want to get to just before that point to get to extension, so you still have a bit of muscle tension when you cut. So Matt wants to know, at the risk of sounding like a stupid question, but as a Mayorist, is there a way to incorporate withdrawing cuts into short edge cuts? So short edge cuts being cuts with the false edge or back edge, I believe. Short answer is probably. Again, I'm primarily a 19th century fencer or post-Enlightenment fencing system person. You certainly can do stuff where you cut down and cut straight back up, although it's not really described in the manual. Or certainly Hutton doesn't describe doing that. It's certainly physically possible. And if your timing is good, you could come down and get out quickly, particularly against someone who's seeking to bind. That's possible. But again, yeah, that's something that I would have to experiment with before I felt really comfortable saying, yes, you can totally do. Anyway, what we're going to do from here as an next drill is I'm going to call random cuts. I'm going to mind them, and we're going to step either forward or back. So obviously, because my right foot is back, any cut I make coming forward will be either 1, 3, or 5, and any cut going backwards will be either 2, 4, or 6. Just because in this you don't cut against your leg. So starting in the engaging guard and coming forward with cut 3, and back with a cut 2, forward with a cut 5, and back with a cut 2, forward with a cut 5, back with a cut 4, forward with a cut 1, back with a cut 6, forward with a cut 1 again, and this time back with a cut 2, forward with a cut 3, back with a cut 4, forward with a cut 1, back with a cut 6, and come to guard. Now switch feet. So now when we go forward, we're going to be going forward with even numbered cuts and going back with odd numbered cuts. So going forward with a cut 2 and back with a cut 3. Forward with a cut 6 and back with a cut 1. Forward with a cut 3, back with a cut 1. Forward with a cut 2, back with a cut 3. Forward with a cut 6, back with a cut 1. And forward with a cut 2, back with a cut 5. And return to guard. Cool. So the reason why I do like random, I teach a group of techniques and then get you to do them randomly is if you do movements in a random sequence, you're more likely to remember the individual movements long term. Whereas, yeah, if I just get them to do them in a progressive sequence, like a repetitive sequence, it is better for short-term memory, but not for long-term. So hopefully you'll implement some of this. All right, cool. So let's move on and look at defenses. So Hutton describes the defenses. He takes plates from, I believe, Morozzo or Morozzo. If I've not pronounced anything correctly, just feel free to correct me. Again, I do pretty much entirely post-Enlightenment fencing. So, you know, sabers and small sword and épée and bayonet and cane and stuff. I'm actually not that knowledgeable when it comes to medieval and Renaissance. So if I get something wrong, just let me know. Like, I'm not going to get embarrassed. And I don't think it's reasonable to expect that, expect me to get everything perfect. And I don't expect myself to. All right. Anyway, let's look at the defenses. So Hutton describes using essentially contemporary foil or French foil fencing terminology. So if I grab my this is technically an épée, but with a foil hilt to make it resemble a knife and strip it a bit more. So we saw before, this is the position of tierce in foil. So I'll show you again. My hand is here, and then when I get the longsword, my front hand is in the exact same position as it would be with the épée. Just I've got another hand on the weapon, and it's a two-handed sword. The one distinction Hutton does make in terms of fencing with it or fencing with each is when using a single-hand weapon in 19th century fencing, a guard has the tip forward, usually on the center line, but definitely pointing at your opponent, whereas a parry has the tip not always, more often in line with the edge of your body and raised enough that your opponent can't disengage over it. But when Hutton talks about two-handed sword, he doesn't make any distinction between guards and parries, which is more in line with earlier fencing systems. When I say earlier, I mean like 18th century. But yeah, distinct from 19th century systems. Primarily because when you only use a sword for cutting, a guard and a parry are basically the same thing. But when you need to thrust, you need to keep your point on line before you can thrust. The problem with that being that having your point low enough to be on line means that your opponent can get over it to feint you. So with a parry, you want it high. All right, so let's have a look at, so if I start at my engaging guard, first parry we're going to look at is prime. So prime in single-handed sword is this. In two-handed sword, my other hand is on the weapon, and I'm looking at my opponent out from under my weapon. So it is, prime, so the sword will be covering the opposite side to my top hand. So my top hand is right, it's covering my left. When you go to prime from an engaging guard, something that's very, very helpful is to draw a circle with your sword. Don't try and go straight there, because what you'll do is this, where you can risk pulling your opponent's sword into your own head. What I want to do is draw a little circle. So that my sword is offering me for protection from about this, from really extension onwards. I'm gaining protection as I cover myself. Whereas if I go straight there from the engaging position, I'm not actually protected until I finish my movement, which means my opponent's got more of a chance to hit me. So let's practice that a few times. So engage and guard, draw a circle, and come to prime. Engage and guard, draw a circle, and come to prime. Engage and guard, draw a circle, and come to prime. Engage and guard, draw a circle, and come to prime. And once more for luck, draw a circle, and come to prime. Right. So the next position is second. So second is this with a single-handed weapon. Hang guard, but this time protecting my, in this case, my outside, but same side as the weapon. Oh, quick question. So historical fence, someone wants to know, are there mentions of how high and low you hold the hilt during cut 5 and 6, for example? Short answer to that is no, Hutton doesn't say. In practical terms, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter in a solo drill because how high you're going to hold it depends on what position your opponent's in. So if your opponent is in this guard, you'd probably be cutting quite high to form position. If your opponent's in a low guard, you'd be cutting lower. It's one of those things where it's dynamic and it's a dynamic thing, so it doesn't really matter in functional terms. And in 19th century, the way the 19th century fences divide up techniques, where it's mostly by definition, like dictionary style definition, it's not because it's not hard and fast rule, it's not relevant to the definition. So there isn't a hard and fast rule about how high you hold your hands. Just basically go with whatever works in the moment. Okay, anyway, sorry, off topic. So second is basically a handguard protecting the same side as your dominant hand. So in this case, if I'm in second, same idea. I draw a circle and come around. You notice I'm not coming this way. I'm not dipping my sword down because that's freaking awkward. From my engaging guard, I'm just drawing a circle and coming around. I find this is actually quite a nice parry. Doing that because you've got a bit of force behind it. You can expel your opponent. So all I do, draw a circle and come to second. Draw a circle and come to second. Draw a circle and come to second. Following along, if you're not already, draw a circle and come to second. And back to guard. Draw a circle and come to second. And back to guard. Draw a circle and come to second. And back to guard. Draw a circle and come to second. And back to guard. Draw a circle and come to second. And back to guard. Draw a circle and come to second. And something that's a really good exercise to do with particularly any 19th century weapon, but I think with any weapon, is to think about how moving between different positions, like what that does. So 19th century fencing, you see a lot of this where there are distinct hand positions and distinct styles of movement, and you build fencing by combining them. So I might move directly to a position, or I might move to that position with a moulinet. And whereas a direct movement gets me there faster, a moulinet gives me more force, for example. So something to think about if you're going over this at home. Question? So that one's through. Is there a way to incorporate circle parries from other guards, such as Cron or Ox? Or is a circle parry and longsword limited to long guards? I don't know. I never have, but I imagine so. So when I talk about the drawing a circle, that's not a property of the parry. That's a property of the movement between that point. So if I'm here, I draw a circle to come to second, or this is septime, sorry. I draw a circle to come to, septime. Keep going the wrong way. Because that's the most efficient way to get there in terms of covering myself. If, however, I'm in, let's say, a tierce guard, I can go directly to septime because that's the most efficient way to get there. So when I was saying before, think about what is the most efficient or the most desirable way to get between 2 points or 2 positions. That's what I mean, is from here, going into moulinet, well, actually might not be too bad. It's a bit wonky with a horizontal moulinet, but the vertical moulinet comes in with a lot of force. Whereas going directly is a lot quicker. Whereas if I'm in an engaging guard, going to septime going septime directly is really, really awkward. I want to draw that circle as a way of getting there smoothly and covering myself with action duration. So yeah, when I talk about positions and transitioning between them, that's what I mean, is that there are different ways to move between positions and some are better than others. And other times they're all equally good, but they do different things. So to go back to your question, is there a way to incorporate them? Certainly. If I'm in a tierce position and I want to move to, let's say prime, I might do a big vertical cut, because that, even though it's a bit slower, it means my parry is more percussive. And I might even be looking to get a percussive parry so that I can then use that to displace my opponent and come in on a very open line. Generally speaking, there are 3 ways to move between points: directly, with a horizontal moulinet, or with a vertical moulinet. And then with a vertical moulinet, there's descending and rising as well, I guess I take it before. So what I mean by that, if you're not familiar with 19th century terminology, is directly is moving with your hands in a straight line, and both your hands and your tip moving in a straight line. So from here, moving directly to here in tierce, moving directly to cart, be doing this, because my hands and my tip move in a direct straight line. If, on the other hand, I move with a horizontal moulinet, my tip circles, but my hands move in a straight line, and that's moving with a horizontal moulinet, or going the opposite way. I'm transitioning using a different movement. And then with a vertical moulinet, would look like that. So I'm using this big vertical moulinet as a way of transitioning. And the transitions do different things. So generally, direct movements are quicker, whereas moulinets are more percussive. The other advantage is a lot of moulinets can be used to get around a guard. So if I've engaged with an opponent, if an opponent has crossed a sword here, I can't attack them with a direct attack because we've engaged swords. So what I do is use a horizontal moulinet to hit them. To hit them and to get around their sword. Like if their sword is here, I can't go directly, so I use a horizontal moulinet. So I hope that kind of answers your questions. Is yes, you can use circular movements and circular parries to move between things. It's certainly true. It's just a question of sort of what effects that will have. And that's sort of something that really needs to be uncovered in sparring. All right, so let's move on and look at the next lot of parries. The next parry is one we've seen before. It's tierce. So much like the tierce guard, in fact, in this they're completely identical. My hand is held basically in this angle, so my palm is facing down. It's held in this alignment. My arms are extended. Let me show you from the side. And the height varies. Basically, I can move it anywhere between here and here, but moving from the shoulder. With this, I don't really want to bend my arms at all. You can do this, but I certainly don't want to bend my arm less than 90 degrees, because then any force, if my arm is more than 90 degrees, any force coming in will hit and basically will push against the line of my arm and force them down, which forces the blow down, which is good because that opens up my opponent. So if I've got a good alignment, my opponent hitting too hard will open them up. If my arms are contracted more than 90 degrees, when the force hits, it doesn't, rather than hitting against the line of the arm, it hits basically along here, which is the angle you push to contract the arm and collapses my arms and hits me. So generally with this, you'll keep your arms extended. You can do more attractive parries, more like a traditional tierce. But yeah, the way Hutton describes it is extended. So let's look at that transition. So if I'm in a medium guard, I want to transition to tierce, just come straight down. If I want to transition to the next guard, which is cart, just come straight across. Now we've sort of looked at this before, so I might skip over getting you to do another heap of repetitions of tierce and cart. Cart being the next position, so my hand is in this alignment, sitting in line with the opposite side of my body. Extended, my tip is out at 45 degrees. I can lift from the shoulders to move up and down. It's pretty much like tierce, except on the other side. So it's, again, and it's also a position that you can guard from quite easily. So that's the next sort of two parries. And so there'll be times when you're in your engaging guard, your opponent comes in and attacks you on your left side. So you drop down to cart to defend yourself. Hutton skips over 5 and 6, mainly because the position of quint is that, which is, I don't know what purpose that would serve. With a longsword, it would be kind of awkward. Same with the position of 6th. You know, 6th is basically cart, but on the same side as your arm. And from what I can tell, it's not a particularly common or useful position in longsword. Although, again, not a longsword fencer, might be wrong. Let me know in the comments. Then he gets into septime and octave. So septime or septime, the hand, you know, with a one-handed weapon, is the hand extended or held really anywhere between here and here, with the palm over in this angle. So septime. In this case, the other hand is on the weapon. The palm is held in this position in line with the opposite side of the body. That's septime. So much like if you're in an engaging guard, I find the best way to get to septime is again with a circle, because going directly gets awkward. Or you sort of end up circling anyway. So from the engaging guard, circle and septime. 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 And once more for luck, circle and septime. Right, and now let's look at the final parry position, which is octave. So octave in single-handed sword is the same hand position as septime, except I'm protecting the opposite side of myself, or the same side as my dominant hand. So where septime protects the opposite side to your top hand, octave protects the same side. So you're coming to here. And usually you'll be looking at your opponent out. I find with this, traditionally with a single-handed sword, octave is held pretty much on the same side, which makes it less common to parry. With longsword, the hand's moved over a little bit, so you're actually covering your head, which can be quite useful. So from here, the way you reach octave is typically through circling. So what you do is circle and come to octave. 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 And circle and come to octave. And back to guard. All right, so those are each of the parries. I'm going to take a quick sip of tea. If you have any questions, do chuck them down. Right, so, got some questions. So Bill wants to know, could be used to set your sword up for a thrusting attack after a parry. It would count as 2 movements combined as 1 motion. I'm assuming you're talking about 5th and 6th. Yes, that is true. You would come to that position to a thrust. And certainly I suspect in a more detailed or like a more comprehensive longsword system, you would do that. And Struggle Fencer says, 6 is awesome in thumb grip. Oh, cool. So I'm assuming by thumb grip you mean thumb on the back of the blade. So I'm assuming to here, which, yeah, that sounds like it'd be at least a very percussive parry. All right, so now let's go through those parries randomly. So I'm going to start in engage guard. Actually, I'm going to drink some more tea because my throat is very dry. I'm going to start an engaging guard. I'm going to call a parry position, and I want you to move to it. Move to it in a way that maximize. And as you move, we'll do this a bit slower. I want you to think of what will maximize the coverage. So you know how before I was saying, if you're going to octave, simply pulling straight back leaves you very, 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 very open until the end. Whereas doing a little circle means you're covered for, you're at least slightly covered from, from pretty much the point where you make the movement. So I want you to look out for that same sort of thing. Think to yourself, right, how covered am I making when I'm making this movement? Or how easily could someone standing directly in front of me make a direct attack? And I deliberately want you to do it rather than me explaining every little nuance of it, because what I'm hoping is that by getting you to work things out for yourself, you'll actually learn how to work, you'll learn how to be adaptive. Whereas, yeah, like, I'm doing one seminar on this. I'm not going to be telling you all the nuances of even just what is a very, very simple system. So, starting your engaging guard, let's go to cart and tierce. And if I want you to switch your feet, I'll call switch. Otherwise, just go to the hand position without moving your feet. And let's go to octave. Septime. Cart. Switch. Engaging guard. Tierce. Prime. Sorry, septime. It's prime. And second. Prime. Tierce. And prime. And you notice how when I do this, drawing a little circle, because that gives me more coverage. And switch. Cart. Octave. Switch and tierce. Go to engaging guard and switch to cart. And switch to tierce. And then up to septime. Now from here, I want you to go to prime. So you notice how, again, I'm drawing a circle, because if I just turn my hand straight over, I will bat my opponent's blade into myself. And from here, let's go to, it's a tricky one, and go to octave. It's really freaking awkward, but a good thing to do because it gets used to moving in weird ways. And down to tierce, switch and go to cart. And from here, go to prime, back to cart, second, back to cart, and engaging guard. All right, cool. So hopefully you've all gotten very limbered up from moving, broken some of those isolation cobwebs, or by moving from moving through all those various positions. All right. Now, let's bring that all together. And so I'm going to call out cuts, and guards, as well as switch to switch your feet. And I'll try my best to not make you cut against your foot by giving you a bizarre command. And I want you to move between all of those positions. Because, okay, something I probably should have specified or made a bit more clear at the start of the lesson. The way 19th century systems of fencing tend to work is they document the continuum of movement in fencing by identifying discrete points as hand positions. So tierce is a discrete point because I will be here, and then my cut 7 is here, is described in terms of my hand being here, and then the move here and then descending down. And so I go tierce 7 is a continuum of movement. And so we're going to sort of see this idea more as we move continuously between various positions. And I want you to sort of visualize how you might do this in a fight, or do this as a reaction to an opponent, as a way of kind of just getting used to thinking about how these techniques will be applied. So starting with let's go left foot forward in engaging guard, because engaging guard can have either foot forward. And let's go with cut 1 on a nice pass. Cut 2 on a pass back, and then come to a tierce position, switch to a cart position, do a cut 2, and then a cut 3 on a step back, come to an engaging guard, sweep through, intercept team, then step forward with a cut 4, retract to a tierce position, step back with a cut 5, engaging guard, from here, sweep forward into second, and from here, without moving our feet, sweep up into a cut 3, no, sorry, cut 4, no, cut 3, miscounting myself. And now come through with a cut forward, I step forward, step back with a cut 5, come to the engaging guard, come to a position of cart, cut 2, stepping forward. I want you to step back into a high step team, and then cut forward with a cut 2 again, and come to the engaging guard. All right, so that's kind of the entire system Like I said, it's not as detailed as a longsword system. I think a lot of people who are very, very used to medieval and Renaissance systems are quite surprised about how little there is to it. But again, this was something that Hutton knew would be treated as a curiosity, but he's basically written a manual of stuff that you can teach in an afternoon. So I've got time for questions. We've got a really good one. It's probably take a while to answer, which is excellent. I like it. So historical fans still want to know about tactics. How do you actually use this stuff? So tactics-wise, this is a parry riposte system. Certainly parry riposte fencing is pretty common in the 19th century, and Hutton specifically, when he describes what tactics he thinks you should use, he says that parry riposte is the best kind of fencing. Like, you can throw feints, you can do beats, you can do all sorts of stuff, but he reckons parry riposte is the best. So what you would do is you'd start in your engaging guard, or even in a tierce guard. Tactically, what I like to do, because I've never used this against someone doing it back to me, unfortunately, I've always had to use it against people who do either Lichtenauer, Fiore, or even actually people who are doing reconstructed English longsword. If someone goes to a shoulder guard, this is fairly typical shoulder guard, I like to cover and basically extend to a guard that gets in the way of their most likely attack, because I find that slows their attack down. And then when they do throw an attack, what I'm looking to do is parry and riposte. And I use a lot of lunges because that's my primary footwork in everything else I do, which does bleed into my tactics when I do this. But yeah, most of the tactics are things like parry, riposte, parry, riposte. You can redouble. You can certainly come in with an attack, preferably one done done very close to out of distance. So if you've got, and particularly when you've got someone who's not used to a two-handed weapon and their hand position is very good, if you come in with an attack at the hand and then come back out and cover yourself with a cut, you can hit them on the hand. The other advantage of that because a two-handed sword has a much more constrained field of movement than a one-handed weapon, you can cut through the center line and reliably hit something, whether that's a hand or a blade. I mean, it does matter in terms of the outcome, but both are good. Because if I throw a cut and then retreat with a cut, I'm going, and cut like just down through the center line, I'm either going to beat my opponent's sword down, which will foil their attack, or I'm going to hit them on the arm. But traditionally what I'm looking to do is parry and riposte. So I want my opponent to attack, they can attack, and then I can riposte. I mean, and then in terms of combinations of parries and ripostes, there's this sort of traditional either cart or tierce and just basically come straight back. Come straight back. I'll be honest, when I do this, it's parry, lunge, riposte, because I do a lot of lunges. But yeah, within the bounds of what's described in the manual, what the expectation would be is that you parry and then riposte with a passing step. And then yeah, the other one I find works really, really well is doing a prime parry, like a prime parry, and then just coming through the cart and doing it as a continuous movement. So if I'm here, my opponent attacks to my open side, this side, I parry and come through in and then riposte. And I try and make it one movement, regardless of the opponent's timing, because the faster I do it, the better. So yeah, those are sort of some of the tactics I use with this. As I was saying before as well, when I say that I do a lot of lunges with this, I don't see that so much anymore, but I remember would have been about 5 years ago now, there are a lot of tournament fighters who would sit in essentially this kind of position, like a cart guard, or maybe even, actually it was nearly always a cart guard position, and attack with quick lungey attacks. A lot of people complain that it's not historical, but that's kind of what, if you're a 19th century fencer, you end up doing. And apparently the reason people did that is that they had a background in like épée or foil, modern Olympic fencing, and they were basically adapting the techniques they were better trained in to longsword than adopting a completely new system. So yeah, so that kind of, but when I say lunges are historical with this, there are descriptions and depictions of people in the 19th century lunging with longsword. And also one thing Hutton says is that longsword is basically just great stick, like two-handed stick, so le grand baton, kind of thing that has survived to the present day. And he certainly says whether he means, and he does mean historically, like he's in the sword through the centuries, he does say that basically he thinks that two-handed stick fighting techniques in Europe are a kind of the last kind of vestige of European two-handed sword fighting. How true that is, I don't know. I don't know if that's ever been historically tested, and Hutton certainly doesn't. Hutton doesn't prove that with sources, unfortunately. Whether that, so it might just be him going, oh, well, these two are really similar, therefore this is the case. But what that does mean is that techniques from Hutton's two-handed stick transfer over to the longsword. And in two-handed stick, you cut with lunges. You cut in a lunge all the time. You do a lot of lunges in Hutton's great stick. You also have thrusts, although they're always centerline. Like the hands are always positioned so essentially with a longsword, the blade will be up and down. He doesn't do thrusts in either card or tierce like you would with a saber. I suspect the reason for that is because with the stick it doesn't matter. There's no edge and there's no handguard, whereas with a longsword there is an edge and a handguard, so you do want to cut one or thrust on angle. And the other thing that the great stick has that isn't in Hutton's longsword, but you could totally adopt and historically justify doing, is a pommel strike. You can just pommel strike, which I find works really nicely if you've got an aggressive fencer who comes in, you can parry, and as they're bearing in, just coming straight in with a pommel strike. That can work quite well. So yeah, that's kind of a summary of the tactics. The system is quite open. There's a lot to it in terms of in terms of things you can do. And the other aspect to this I think is quite interesting is there's obviously inspiration taken from a lot of other things that are bleeding into what was happening in the 19th century. So things like great stick, particularly, but also just saber and foil. as well. But at the same time, Hutton is also drawing very strongly from historical sources. So if you wanted to justify being able to use sources from multiple periods and still say, oh, I'm doing the swords, I'm doing the fencing of a singular period. If you did 19th century longsword, you could reasonably justify doing techniques of greatsword, but also of Morozo, of Maya, of Jacob Sutter. As far as I know, Hutton didn't really get back into the medieval sources, so he doesn't Hutton, to my knowledge, he doesn't seem to be very particularly aware of the early Lichtenhauer stuff or of Fiore, but he is very, very into the Bolognese stuff. And so you could reasonably go, okay, well, we're going to use stuff that's from the manuals that Hutton obviously studied to put this together. Cool. So are there any other questions whilst we're here? So let's have a look. So before everyone pops off, I do want to remind everyone that after this, we will be meeting in Zoom just to hang out. So if you have questions, you can ask me there as well. And also, it's just kind of nice to talk because lockdown can get quite lonely. The other thing is, if you enjoyed the talk and want to support the Old Sword Club, we do ask that you give a donation. Obviously, this is optional, and I will keep these lessons free for as long as I can, but we do have some small overheads that we need to cover, most notably the streaming software we use, and also we need to start putting money aside to get ready to open back up once, I don't know, I've been saying this for months, and then it feels like everything is going to open back up, and then it doesn't. But yeah, if you can give a donation, if you enjoyed the class, please do. Otherwise, yeah, just like, share, subscribe, comment, and yeah, I'll see you all. I'll see you all at the next lesson. Next week as well, we're doing saber and using a scabbard as an offhand weapon, which is going to be cool. And also kicks. There's not as many kicks in the system as the title of the workshop might have suggested, but yeah, the system also will be doing also incorporates kicks. So I will see you then.